All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Shri Shri Guru and Shri Guru. Bhagavati Uttama Shri Bhagavati Nashiki, reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, from the 5th canto, 13th chapter, 5th verse. Invisible. Hili. The crickets are a kind of bee. Svana. By the sounds. Karanashula. Whose ears are disturbed. Wandering in the forest of the material world, the conditioned soul sometimes hears an invisible cricket making harsh sounds, and his ears become very much aggrieved. Sometimes his heart is pained by the sounds of owls, which are just like the harsh words of his enemies. Sometimes he takes shelter of a tree that has no fruits or flowers. He approaches such a tree due to his strong appetite, and thus he suffers. He would like to acquire water, but he is simply illusioned by a mirage, and he runs after reports by Srila Prabhupada. In Srimad Bhagavatam, it is said that the Bhagavata philosophy is meant for people who are completely free from envy, paramo nirmatsarana. The material world is full of envious people. Even within one's inner circle, there is much backbiting, and this is compared to the sound vibration of a cricket in the forest. One cannot see the cricket, but one hears its sound and thus becomes aggrieved. When one takes to Krishna consciousness, one always hears unpalatable words from relatives. This is the nature of the world. One cannot avoid mental distress due to the backbiting of envious people. Being very much aggrieved, sometimes one goes to a sinful person for help, but he has no means to help because he has no intelligence. Thus the living entity is disappointed. This is like running after a mirage in the desert in an effort to find water. Such activities do not produce the tangible results. Due to being directed by the illusory energy, a conditioned soul suffers in so many ways. Translation again. Wandering in the forest of the material world, the conditioned soul sometimes hears an invisible cricket making harsh sounds, and his ears become very much aggrieved. Sometimes his heart is pained by the sounds of owls, which are just like the harsh words of his enemies. Sometimes he takes shelter of a tree that has no fruits or flowers. He approaches such a tree due to his strong appetite, and thus he suffers. He would like to acquire water, but he is simply illusioned by a mirage. So, in the purport, Prabhupada refers to the Srimad Bhagavatam. And in it, he says that it's meant for people who are completely free from envy, paramo nirmatsaranam. I think he translates paramo nirmatsaranam as one who is fully purified. So in a sense, the Srimad Bhagavatam is meant only for sadhus and others. On the other hand, we distribute Srimad Bhagavatam to anyone and everyone, regardless of whether they're pure devotees or not. So the idea is to distribute Krishna consciousness, never knowing what the karmic background of anyone is. Sometimes a person is very advanced, we don't know it. And sometimes he's a great fool and appears to be very advanced. We don't know that either. But it's difficult to know. So this chapter, and I think the next one, talk about how terrible the material world is. And a lot of devotees come to Krishna consciousness because the material world is awful or terrible. But these verses are kind of like allegorical, talking about owls and herons and other crickets. I think they call them cicadas here. Cicadas, is that right? Making loud noises, and it's all kind of like a bad dream or a nightmare. I don't know if some of you have ever had nightmares before. They're horrible things, and we're very happy to wake up because they're horrible. Prabhupada once said in a lecture that he had a dream that he was being eaten by a tiger. Yeah, in a lecture he said that. He said, I thought I was being eaten by a tiger, and then I woke up, and he was very relieved that he woke up because it was a very bad dream. Some psychologists think that dreams are like our subconscious. They're the real essence of what we are, or our psyche. They're real reality. I heard once that, I think Prabhupada said this, that sometimes in a dream we imagine things. We can think about gold, and we can think about a mountain, and we can dream of a golden mountain, but when we wake up, we have a sense that there's no such thing as a golden mountain. Or, he said that, but dreams are like that. They're kind of concoctions. There are little bits of this, a little bit of that, and sometimes we hear this, and sometimes we hear that. So in a sense, it's not really a reality. It's just a kind of mental, kind of imagination. People like William Shakespeare and other great writers dip into their imagination. They just dream up things that are very interesting, but not necessarily real. People like to read novels, they like to go to movies, and they like to... Storytelling, it's a very important thing. It may not be true, it may be totally invented, concocted, fictional, but people like those kinds of things. Nightmares are kind of like that, and dreams are kind of like that. Dreams are part of our what we call imagination. We just think of things, and sometimes people think this is very important. It's like the creative process, and in a way it is. In cinema, novel writing, and we find this in the Bhagavatam too, that sometimes allegories or metaphors are used, and they give us a sense of what's real. You can talk about crickets and herons and birds that peck your eyes out. That's in the Bhagavatam too. It's in the 5th canto. If you're not properly accommodating guests, there's a punishment where big birds come down and peck your eyes out.
They call children.
Pardon?
They're called children.
They're called children. Unwanted guests. There's a guest, I think it's called a titi, and it's not only in this in Vedic tradition, but I think it's in other religious traditions where an uninvited guest has to be facilitated, has to be given a nice seat, a place to sleep, nice food and water and things like that. There's a story in the Bhagavatam about, I think it was King Rantidev, who was, undergoing a long fast. It was for 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks or something like that. He didn't have anything, and because he was a king, he was able to do this for a long time. And then just as he was about to sit down and have his big repast, some unwanted, uninvited guests turned up. Anyway, the story is kind of interesting because the unwanted guests turned out to be Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma, and Lord Vishnu. And they were disguised as beggars, but he gave them food, even though he was fasting for a long time, just about to eat. And I think first he gave them food, and then he gave them water, and like this. So it's a very interesting story. And it shows that anyone we approach could be a very advanced person. Could be our spiritual master. Who knows? Could be the spiritual master of our children. Could be the spiritual master of ourselves. We really don't know. So the uninvited guest is always very much honored in Vedic tradition. Someone told me when I was still in high school that there was a feeling of what this was one of my teachers that said that when you go to India, there's a feeling of brotherhood everywhere. If you go into the home of someone who you don't know, they treat you very royally. They give you a seat, they give you something to eat, something to drink, a nice place to sleep. So wherever you go, you're never sort of a wandering homeless vagabond. you're treated very well. And it's part of this tradition of the unwanted guest being somebody important. I think that exists in other religious traditions too. There's the unwanted guest has to be facilitated. But it's particularly noticeable in the Vedic tradition, and it comes from the Srimad Bhagavatam. So this thing about the material world being a bad place is known to us, but it's kind of interesting that people, even though it's kind of ironic, even though people realize that it's bad, they continue to do it. When I was at university, we used to go out on the weekends and get drunk and suffer the next day with a big hangover. But the next weekend, we would do the same thing, even though there was a big hangover coming up. We knew it, but we just kept on doing it anyway. So it's kind of ironic that we know there's some bad things happening. We know we're going to get hungover, or we know there's a lot of bad reactions to different things that we do, illicit sex, gambling. When I used to go to Las Vegas, it's one of the centers of gambling in the world, like Monte Carlo. And I would go. I think I went there about 20 times because it's not far from Los Angeles. I lived in Los Angeles. And I would hear people in the mornings bragging to each other after, being up all night gambling. Oh, I lost $10,000 or $20,000. It was like, a status symbol to lose, to just be able to throw away, to never see it again, $20,000. And I used to hear these people bragging to each other about how much money they lost gambling. It was a big status symbol. And then they would come back maybe a few months later or something like that and do it all over again. They didn't care. So it's kind of ironic. It is ironic that there's so many things that we can lose in the material world, and so much suffering that we can undergo, and yet we continue to do it. An example is the songs that are popular today. They're forgotten tomorrow. They're in the outer darkness somewhere. And yet people keep buying these records. They keep spending their money on recordings. They spend their money on automobiles. They spend their money on all kinds of things, on whiskey and liquor. And they suffer for all these things, and yet they continue to do it. So it's sort of ironic. There's a thing, I think it's outlawed now, but it was kind of done underground called the Death Rally. 2 automobiles, this was in Germany. I know this because I talked to a devotee who was a Death Rally sportsman. He used to take part. He used to be one of the racers. And 2 automobiles would come on this, along towards each other in a lane that was so narrow that there wasn't any room for moving aside. It was like a one lane. And they'd come, and the person who, and people would go to these. Sometimes thousands of people would come and watch these things called death rallies. And they would love to see the cars collide and see somebody die. And we heard about this in Rome with the gladiators. We think it was very degraded how people would watch people be eaten by lions and tigers. But this thing exists today, probably even more intensely. They were doing it in Germany, and then if you turned out, you were a failure. You lost. You didn't win the big money. But even the turning out was very dangerous because there was no place for no smooth place for a car to transverse. It was like very bumpy, and sometimes that person would get very badly injured. But the person who didn't turn out would be the winner, would get the big money. Those were called death rallies, and it was very popular. But Prabhupada once said, I think that of all the white people in the world, the German people were very intelligent. So they figured out a way to do this, to have these death rallies without the government knowing about it, because technically they're illegal, watching people get killed and die and set up these things. But they did it for a long time. And there was one person, I don't know if he's still a devotee, he was a devotee when I talked to him about this. He was a death rally racer. And, he never turned out. And he stayed alive somehow or other. And there was a big winner. Anyway, that's kind of like what happens. People love death, and they have kind of people have what we might call death wish. I think there was a book about that called Death Wish sometime. People like and it's I'm 70 years old now, but I remember that there was very little in music and in the general kind of tenor of things earlier on where people weren't very, very, very excited about death. But now it seems to become a very, very popular thing, dying and death. And you see in these, when I was in Los Angeles, I saw some MTV things. They were pictures of roofs, and it was all about dying and death, you know. And sometimes I look on the internet and see that there's these previews of coming attractions of films, and a lot of times automobiles are catching on fire and buildings are catching on fire. When this 9/11 thing happened, when this really happened, when airplanes crashed into the buildings, a lot of people said that they see stuff like this all the time, and they didn't know whether it was real or not, because that sort of thing could be manufactured by modern technology, a plane crashing into a building and catching on fire, and thousands of people dying. So in a sense, it really happened, but a lot of people thought it was just, at first, they thought it was just something that was, you know, made up, manufactured, sort of a false, not a real thing, sort of, you know, an imaginary thing that someone did. But it really happened. So this kind of death wish is there. People love to see dying. And there was, I forget the name of the group, there was a song called Dirty Laundry, and it said, "We love it when people die." That was one of the lyrics. We love it when people die. And it was all about the newspapers and television, you know, how they're very attracted to death and dying. And this is somewhat similar to what's being said here in the Bhagavatam. If you look at the daily newspapers, most of the stories are about death, dying, corruption, disasters, people just getting sick. It's a very common thing. When I moved to New Zealand about 10 years ago, it was a different thing. Those are what most of the newspapers are like in America. But every once in a while, when I was in New Zealand, I would see an article in the newspaper. Would be about the rise on the front page. This is an article about the rise in costs of healthcare. That was a big thing. And I thought, oh, that's nice. This is a nice country. And the next day, they're all about disasters and killing and wars and, you know, football games and things like that. But every once in a while, there was something kind of like, you know, not kind of harmless, kind of innocent, we might say. So these are, you know, it's kind of ironic that the material world is like that. It's like a nightmare, but we do it anyway. It's kind of like, you know, you have to go to sleep at night, and you might have a nightmare, but you just have to sleep. There's no way around it. So, does someone have anything to say, or any comments, or suggestions, or questions, or yes?
Is it somehow or another a better reflection of seeing Krishna like killing the demons and like back when green red enthusiasm?
I think you could say that. He was asking if this is a kind of a perverted reflection of Krishna killing demons and all the evil in the world, that sort of thing. Is that what you're getting at? I think it was kind of interesting that it's not it's in the Bhagavatam that there was some lectures in the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita where the Kurus and the Pandavas are assessing each other. They're trying to find out. The Kurus are trying to find out how many men they have to fight. It's all written up there, and it's in a lecture too. So it's very important to know what the strength of the enemy is, even though and what it means is that even in the family of the Kurus and the Pandavas, it was all like one family. But as it's mentioned here, there's backbiting even within the families. So this was going on even then, and they were trying to assess the strength of the enemy. And I think I heard a lecture on this chapter that it was very important that sometimes in business people assess the wealth of their enemies, or they think that if they're not careful they could lose all their wealth. That's the evil of the world. It could all be lost. You could have millions of dollars in the bank, and it can all be lost, or it can all be taken by an enemy. So the inimical and the enemies are always there. The non-Krishna conscious, the demoniac, as Prabhupada called it, are always there. So the material world being an unsavory place to live in, or no place for a civilized human being to live in, is a very common philosophy of life. And even when Krishna was here, because he had to fight, there were people who were trying to kill Krishna, and there was a plot to murder Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So it not only happens in current times, but it was happening thousands of years ago when Krishna was present. So he was fighting the evil of the world, and he says that in Bhagavad Gita that he comes to, one of the reasons he comes is to annihilate the demons. When he comes to earth, his internal reason, his main reason is to remind people about to be Krishna conscious. I think Prabhupada said in one lecture that that wasn't a lecture, it was a letter. It was written to one devotee. There was a devotee who was a student at Oxford, and he said, I'm encouraged to always use my mind in writing papers and giving classes and taking examinations. I'm always encouraged to use my mind. But when I read the Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, it says that we have to control the mind and we have to beat the mind. And the mind is a sense that misleads us. Yet I have to use it. And Prabhupada wrote to him and said, you have to understand how Krishna is the taste of water. And if you can write about that and meditate on that, you're using your mind, but you're using it in the right way. You're using it for Krishna. So, Krishna is the taste of water. That's mentioned in Bhagavad Gita. What is it? Rasaham Apsa Kuntaya. I am the taste of water. I am the light of the sun and moon. So one of the ways that people can realize Krishna is that if they're very thirsty and they drink water, or they're very hungry and then they eat, they feel very good afterwards. So that good feeling is Krishna. So the person doesn't even have to chant Hare Krishna. I mean, they should, but if they don't have to. If they can just realize, and I think in one lecture Prabhupada said that even if an alcoholic is drinking wine and thinks that that's Krishna, because that's his pleasure, he thinks that that's Krishna, that's beneficial for him. He thinks that that's God. Maybe he doesn't use the word Krishna, but he thinks that God is the pleasure that he feels. That's a good thing. So there's always evil in the world, and Krishna's fighting the demons is reminding us about that fact. That even though Krishna himself comes, there are people that want to kill Krishna. And they're symbolic of all the evil in the world. And I think it was said that Ravana was a very great scholar and a great devotee of Lord Shiva, but his desire to build a stairway to heaven, his one thing was that he was against Krishna. His one fault was that he was against Krishna. And he wanted to build a stairway to heaven because he thought that, by my own power, I can be the king of the world, and Lord Ram defeated him because of that. In other words, he wanted the kingdom of God without God, and that was one of the reasons why Sita was symbolically she was there, and then this big fight took place because of her being kidnapped. Yes.
Well, it says that everything is Krishna, even the material energy is still like a form of Krishna. So wouldn't you say by that logic that even the demons are Krishna? Like how are they excluded?
They're not exactly excluded, but it just shows that there's evil in the world all the time. Even though everything is Krishna, Bhumir Apo, the water, the rocks, everything is the air, everything is Krishna. But depending on how that thing is used is whether it's devotional or demonic. Sometimes demons can use rocks as weapons to throw at Krishna, and devotional people can worship a rock, like a Shalagram Shila, and it can be used in Krishna's service. The rock can be used in Krishna's service. One can build a beautiful temple made out of rock.
If Krishna is controlling everything, then why would Krishna want to throw rocks at himself or try to kill himself?
It's not that Krishna is trying to kill himself, but Krishna is giving freedom to the living entity to do whatever the living entity wants to do. And that's mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita in the last chapter. Krishna says to Arjuna, I've told you what is right, and now you decide what to do. So like a loving father or mother to their child, to their offspring, they're given good directions and they're told what is right, but they ultimately have to decide what they want to do with their life. And that's where the demonism comes in, because people want to go away from Krishna.
Why would Krishna bother giving that sort of freedom? Like if you look at each demigods and humans and everything as part of Krishna and his servants and stuff. So for example, I don't want my arm to go and do whatever it wants and like slap me in the head and stuff. I want it to do what you want it to do. Yeah. So why would
Well,
God-
Krishna has unusual power. I mean, he can control everything, but he's not a control freak. But he knows how many hairs we have in our head. Even we don't know. But at the same time, he loves all the living entities, just like a parent loves their offspring. So he gives that offspring freedom to choose to be Krishna conscious or to not be Krishna conscious. And that's where evil and demonism comes in. People sometimes just want to go away from Krishna, and there's no particular reason for it. Of course, Maya is very strong. Krishna is not easily seen. He says that in Bhagavad Gita. I have a curtain of Maya, or he says that in Bhagavatam. There's a curtain of Maya that surrounds me. And the living entities also have sinful desires deeply buried within their hearts. Sometimes it's a result of their past karma. So there's three things actually. There's the power of Maya, there's the sinful desires that are within the living entity, and there's the tendency to go away from Krishna or to just not being able to see Krishna, because there's three things: his invisibility or his curtain of Maya, the power of Maya, and the sinful desires that are buried within the heart of everyone. So even though you don't want your arm to slap your face, it does it anyway. Sometimes we call it involuntary. It involuntarily, there's a spasm or something. It just happens. And so that's kind of what demonism is. It's mentioned in one of the Puranas that the material world is actually only 1/4 of the whole creation. In the Bhagavad Gita, it's called Ekamsena. It's not mentioned specifically, but it just says part of it, not 1/4. But it's actually in there that it's 1/4. So every once in a while, these spasms or these clouds come. But the normal, natural way is the sun is shining everywhere. And people off the earth, they don't see clouds. I mean, in outer space, they don't see clouds.
Isn't this concept not conducive to Krishna's purity, Krishna being pure? Why would this happen?
The reason it happens is because he loves everyone. And if without love, people can't make a free choice. Yes.
In the Bhagavad Gita sloka, it just says like, I'm the tasting water, Krishna says, but he also says like, I'm the shark among the fishes and I'm the lion among the animals.
Cheat among the chiefs.
Yeah, cheat among the chiefs. So I'm just wondering, like, lion and shark, they're just in mode of ignorance, like they eat meat and it's very horrible the way they do that. So how come Krishna chose those animals instead of
That in the 10th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna it's kind of symbolic, and Krishna is saying that he is the most powerful of all living entities. If you try to cheat Krishna, he can cheat you more. There was even an article in a magazine about it showed Prabhupada pointing, and it was kind of attractive because here's a sadhu, saying very strong and harsh words and making very strong and harsh gestures, and the article was talking about Prabhupada saying that if you try to cheat Krishna, you'll become a greater cheater. So, businessmen, sometimes they think they're doing very well and they're very successful, and then all of a sudden it's gone, it's taken away, it's lost, or an enemy gets it. So that's Krishna. He's taking everything away. That's the meaning of Hare, one who takes away. I think we have time for one more question, yes.
I was just wondering, if there are so many different species of living entities, how does one become, for example, something really random like a deep sea fish or something? Would somebody be thinking of deep sea fishes when they're dying? Or?
There was a time when Prabhupada was encouraging cinema as an art, and there was a devotee named Yadavar who founded ISKCON Cinema, and he said that you should make a movie showing that the housewife is cleaning her kitchen and she sees a cockroach, and all of a sudden she has a heart attack and dies, and then she becomes a cockroach. She gets born as a cockroach. So, according to a Bengali proverb, whatever you're thinking, and according to Bhagavad Gita, it says whatever you're thinking at the time of death is what you become. So you can become a fish, you can become a worm in the stool if you're thinking about that at the time of death, or if you led a life that's, like that, and you're going to be thinking about that at the time of death.
That's the real world.